I would like to introduce Monika.
Anya, thank you very much. And hello, guys. Hello, team. Thank you very much for joining me today. We are going to look at a monster in this particular session, the one called imposter syndrome and also called imposter phenomenon. Let me share with you quite quickly a short agenda for our today's session. Just give me literally 1 sec. There you go. Can you see my screen okay? You do, brilliant. Let me just go into presentation mode. So, in terms of agenda, first of all, we are going to have a quick look what this monster actually stands for, what exactly imposter syndrome means. We will also have a quick peek at who might be more prone than the others to actually suffer from it and why. We will have a look on potential consequences, but most importantly, we will try to answer a question, what to do to take it under control. But before we jump into the session itself, let me ask a quick question. Are there any additional wishes, any additional, let's say, elements that you would like me to address during the session which are not covered currently in the agenda? Please raise your hands, and I will be more than happy to take any wishes from the audience. It seems that agenda, if I'm seeing that correctly, it seems that agenda covered the needs quite okay, hence I will move forward. And let me start with the, let's say, key question. First of all, why me? And secondly, why that particular topic? Why particular topic? I actually, both in my corporate experience and in my coaching practice, have come across multiple times, let's say, across the imposter syndrome. For me, it became a proof close to my heart that it's not only quite widespread, but actually can also have quite prominent impact on how we govern our careers, how we make our choices, both in professional and private life. Secondly, I started to dwell more into the topic in the course of my research for my PhD. As some of you might know, it's actually circling around power in organization and how to build it successfully. So exploring different frameworks related to power, I actually came across very interesting research, which has been also leveraged in this particular presentation. And I'll be happy to share more data with you later on. And it's actually worthwhile to understand what this phenomenon is all about, not only to provide self-help, but more importantly, to recognize that in others and help them to overcome successfully. Last, but definitely not least, you asked me if I knew anyone who suffers from imposter syndrome, let me be the one to raise my hand first. So I'm speaking to some extent also from my own experience. Okay, so let's be very academic about it, and let's start with official, let's say, explanation or official comment, what it actually is. So let me just make it more visible. Let me read the definition and then offer some commentary to some specific words which pop up in this definition because they are quite key. So, imposter syndrome describes high-achieving individuals who, despite their objective successes, fail to internalize their accomplishments and have persistent self-doubt and fear of being exposed as fraud or an imposter. And I see somebody raising their hands, so let me switch to, okay. Okie dokie, I thought that was a question coming. So let me comment on some words which are quite prominent in that particular definition. First one, high achieving. So what it means is that actually this syndrome is quite characteristic one for those people whom we would never expect to show any symptoms of it, like celebrities, actors, politicians, really accomplished people. Secondly, despite their objective successes. Meaning there is actually proof that
Welcome to Zoom. This meeting is being recorded. You are in the meeting.
Are doing great. And there are objective signals of it, like achieved KPIs, awards, goals, recognition coming from others. But nevertheless, it does not help to fight this persistent self-doubt. What is also kind of key in terms of the factors and how we look at it, if we look on this definition, it tells us that, let's say, what sits inside us, it's not enough to prove our worth to the world almost. But on the other hand, as you will see in the next parts of my presentation, actually everything which is not working, those who suffer from imposter syndrome will tend to attribute to themselves. This said, let's have a look on something, let's say, written in more plain language and more with unofficial explanation, but which for me is much more, let's say, user-friendly, so to speak. So even as others praise our own talents, you just write it off, your successes, as a case of timing or just good fortunes. You don't believe that you earned it on your own merits, and you feel that others will see it at some point. What it starts is a type of a vicious circle. That vicious circle makes you work even harder. Why? First of all, to keep others from recognizing that something is amiss. Secondly, to become worthy of the roles that you believe that you do not deserve. Also, to make up for something which you consider as lacking in terms of skills, intelligence, preparation, you name it. And last but not least, to ease your feeling of tricking others into believing that you really can accomplish certain things. What it means is that on one hand, you attribute your accomplishments to external factors like luck, great timing, good coincidence. But on the other hand, you will tend to put all your misgivings as purely your fault. I'm not sure you see that interesting dichotomy. Everything good, nothing to do with me, or very little to do with me, all bad, all my fault. What it results in is very easy to guess. It might result in being overwhelmed, in feeling burned out, in feeling anxiety, and effectively guilt. Quick pause, I wanted to check with you just to sense, where we are, so to speak, and I understand that I can ask Jeff's help here. If you try to think, what is the percentage of population that you believe is estimated to suffer from this particular syndrome? And I will give you a hint, this is actually a tricky question, and I will explain later why. And secondly, whether women, there you go. So please cast your votes.
In the meantime, I also want Monika to raise one question that was in chat. Maybe you can address it later. Where does the self-doubt end and imposter syndrome start? It's a question from Harold.
That's a brilliant question. Please, let's keep it in mind. We will definitely come to that, but it's a brilliant question. Thank you very much, Anne, for raising it. Brilliant, guys. So let us see. We have some sort of, let's say, normal distribution, I would say, looking on the results. So let's, okay, people are still voting, so let's give it a moment. Okay, let me be absolutely honest. It is a tricky question. Why? Because in 2019, there was a brilliant, let's say, work done, because it was less of a research, more as a desk research, where scientists gathered all the materials and all the research done so far in terms of imposter syndrome and tried to, let's say, correlate different results with some generalized learnings. What they've seen is that depending on how we define population, the levels of imposter syndrome varied from 2% to more than 80%. So in a way, all of you were right. That's the good news. But the interesting fact is there were actually populations, quite accomplished ones, which were easy to, let's say, define, like, for example, academic environment, which apparently landed in the highest percentages. Brilliant. So Jeff, if we can now have a look on opinion of our participants in terms of poll number 2. Do you think women are the only ones who might have something to do with imposter syndrome? I see some still votes coming in. But guys, I think how to put it, the difference is so massive that we can start summarizing. Yes, you're absolutely right. At the beginning, it was portrayed as something which is typical for women. But the further we go, so to speak, the more research is prepared, the more apparent it becomes, also based on the same study that I've mentioned from 2019, that actually there are no differences and we are all prone to it. What it also means, let me just try to, because I see some raised hands, so let me stop sharing the presentation just for a moment and actually see whether any questions are popping in. Yes. So in terms of differences, both men and women actually can suffer from it. What it means for us as leaders, us as managers, but also as friends, is that let's not look for that particular predicament, let's say, only among women, but it's actually very, very universal. Let me check quickly any particular question. And I see already, Raj, I see your comment around high standards. Yes, we will come to that in a second. You are reading my mind and I see you nodding your head. We will go to that in a moment. Harald, to come to your question, where the self-doubt ends and imposter syndrome starts. That's a beautiful question. Actually, there is a available questionnaire that you can check for yourself whether you meet certain elements or certain characteristics that might make you more prone to imposter syndrome, or actually you might be having it as we speak. But this said, there are also certain characteristics which I'm going to discuss right now, which might make you kind of more prone to that particular phenomenon. Let me reshare. Can you still see my screen, guys? Probably not. Just give me 1 sec and reshare it again. There you go. So you ask who is prone to that particular phenomenon. And we have 5 profiles, which were actually proven over and over again in terms of different studies, who show certain characteristics that make them more prone. And let me tell quick stories about each and every one of them. So we have perfectionist, and I think it does not need that much of an explanation, really. This profile is around those who demand perfection of yourself in every aspect of your life, and actually as perfection, continuous one in all time points. It's not always a realistic goal. You can't meet those standards continuously. Therefore, what happens? You start to criticize yourself even for a smallest mistake and actually feel ashamed of yourself as a failure if not everything is absolutely perfect. So this bears down to the comment that Raj shared just a moment ago. What it might lead to is that, for example, that you stop trying new things because you are so afraid that you will not be perfect from the very start, and you critique the smallest mistake that you make, that you simply resign from trying. So if you ask me what will be the mantra of this person, it would be, I critique myself for the smallest mistake. Let me pause here because I saw some commentaries actually on that particular topic, and let me stop sharing just for a second and check with you guys, are there any comments or anything you want to share so far from what has been said?
Monika, there is a question from Saurabh about the
Yes.
correlation between underprivileged societies versus more balanced one.
We will come to that again in a moment in terms of why it appears, and actually to give you a heads up or let's say a teaser, it will pop up in literally next slide when we will mention from where it actually takes its origins. And indeed, the less privileged, let's say, groups will be more prone to the phenomenon, I'm afraid, and this has been checked by the research. Any other reactions, guys, at this point of time before we dwell into the next profiles? A very nice comment from Rohit. Do certain cultures promote more imposter syndrome than others? That's actually an interesting question to you guys. What would be your take on that? Looking from the perspective of your own culture. Raj.
So I just want to say this, having lived in Asia for many years in the Far East, and then having lived in Africa, and then, for the last 25 years in the US, I think it depends on how the society is made. In Asia, it's very group kind of culture. You respect your seniors. There's a lot of people are very not so open to taking credit that fast because they fear that might be seen in a negative light. And then in the US, it's an individualistic society. So it's the exact opposite. So I'm not saying the standards are lower here, but I think the ability to take credit is ingrained in the DNA versus, say, in the Far East, where even if someone did the job, he's never going to take credit unless you push. And it's a very different mindset. And I see it with some of the people I work with who've come from Asia versus somebody from here. The two interns I might have who might have done the same thing, but the way they talk about their work, or in one case don't talk about their work, can be quite interesting and revealing in itself.
That's a brilliant point, Raj. You actually preempted some of my thoughts from the next slide, so let's bear it in mind. But you are very right, kind of mentioning the massive impact that our upbringing and more broadly culture that we live in might have on this particular phenomenon. But also one more element which appeared in the chat, again, about upbringing. Guys, you are brilliant. I mean, you are reading my mind before I'm even able to verbalize some of the thoughts. So brilliant minds think alike, what can I say? So please keep that in mind. We will come back to it literally in a second. Let me share the screen again. This time I will share that maybe slightly differently, just to be able to see the whoops, just a small technical predicament, just bear with me, please. Screen, there you go, share. Brilliant. So point number 2, so we covered perfectionist, let's keep it in mind. Then we have point number 2, so-called natural geniuses. Who are those? Maybe you remember somebody from your high school or from your primary school, or maybe you were actually that unique student who seemed to literally fly through all the classes without much effort involved. Best grades just piled up. Everything seemed to be easy. You did not have to work very hard. You literally picked up new skills as you went along. What happens sometimes is that the more we advance in life and more challenges appear, like, for example, going to college, we suddenly realize that this happy-go-lucky approach is not working anymore. And some of the skills actually require our effort. And then we start to say to ourselves, wait a minute, throughout my primary school, throughout my college, I was actually doing, maybe before college, I was doing great. It didn't require any effort. Does this mean that I'm stupid? Or does does this mean that I do not belong in college? Because it seems that all my other peers are doing much better and I'm struggling. So if I am to summarize the natural geniuses mantra in just one sentence, I would be, I need to success on first try. If I'm not succeeding on the first try, meaning something is wrong with me. Then we have so-called soloists. And this is a very nice kind of hedgeway to what Raj already mentioned, because it also comes with, as you described, that individualistic culture, which we might observe. Those are the ones who kind of have it engraved that in order to succeed, you have to do that by yourself. Asking for help or involving others is actually seen as a sign of weakness, sign of not being able to cope anymore. So in other words, if again we were to formulate that particular profile into central mantra, we would say, I need no help. I need to do that by myself. Point number 4, we have so-called experts. Experts are the ones who consider, let's say, before doing anything, they need to know everything about this particular task. They need to become so-called experts. So they might spend a lot of time pursuing certain information, but then if they are suddenly faced with a situation where they do not know everything, because, for example, they just started to get interested in the new venture or new skill or new hobby or new subject or new course in lead, they suddenly realize that there is something amiss. They don't know everything. And this is where this feeling, let's say, out of depth sets in. So again, if you ask me what the mantra is in this particular case, I would say it would be, I should know everything. Last but definitely not least is so-called superhero. Superhero is the one that believes that I need to be perfect in everything that I do. As you all know, we have multiple roles across our life. We are mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, students, professionals, coaches, you name it. The list goes on and on. And if I fail in any of those roles for whatever reason, of being, I don't know, too tired, of the pure fact that day has only 24 hours, okay, I haven't delivered according to expectations. So if you again ask me about mantra, I should be perfect in everything. To sum up those 5 profiles, which again, as I highlighted, seem to be correlated based on the studies more than others with having the imposter syndrome setting in, we would have perfectionist. So I critique myself for the smallest mistake. The natural geniuses. So I need to succeed on the first try. Then we have individualists. I need no help from others. We have experts. I should know everything. And the superheroes. I should be perfect in everything that I do. Let me pause here for a moment and ask you, how does it feel even to listen to those, let's say, statements without even going into next step of actually fulfilling them? What would be the feelings that you would say after hearing that? It's all my fault in terms of the tiniest mistakes. I need to succeed on the first try. I need no help. I should know everything. And I should be perfect in everything. Any first reactions?
Monika, honestly, you gave me a bit of a chill. So
Tell me more, Amit.
So when you spoke about the soloist, I was resonating with that because like Raj was alluding to, there are certain things in Asian culture that kind of come about. And even self-reflecting now, some of what I do is like, I second guess whether I should ask for help or not. And I think that piles up over time. So, yeah.
I mean, thank you very much for mentioning this. I think it's resonant. You are, first of all, you are not alone. I raised my hand at the very beginning and I'm not putting it down, so to speak. But let me put it like that. What effects, from your perspective, it might have on certain tasks or even on certain, ventures that you start? This sort of, pressure, because effectively it isn't pressure put on you.
I think it's one, it demotivates a little bit. You may not want to do the task because you're afraid what will happen at the end of it. And I think the other part of it is, you're spending a lot of time trying to guess what would happen. So it builds a little bit of anxiety, I think, on the same. So yeah, I think those two thoughts come to mind right now.
Brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. You mentioned the key word here, because as I kind of hinted on the previous slide, but you echoed that so clearly now. The element that sets in is, first of all, burden. This was the element that I had in mind when I asked, how does it make you feel? I felt literally, even reading those statements, I also almost like felt the weight put on my shoulders, that I need to perform to the top of my ability at all points of time, where honestly, it's not humanly possible to be perfect at every single point of time. So that's one element. And the other, it automatically creates anxiety, as you mentioned. And furthermore, even the feeling of guilt, because you come to realization, wait a minute, I think that this is expected of me, or more importantly, this is what I expect from myself. And as a result, the pressure gets even higher, and you enter in this vicious circle, which I mentioned, because then you push even harder. You say, okay, Amit, you need to, pull it all together, or Monika for that matter, you need to pull it all together. You need to work even harder. You should not ask for any help, because somebody might consider that you simply are not capable of doing that alone. And what sort of association will come with that? So thank you very much for sharing, Amit, much appreciated. Surbi, you have a raised hand.
Yeah, thanks, Monika. Great topic. I think most of us probably feel it, but I can speak personally for myself. I associate it with a lot, and I do catch myself after especially engaging in these sessions and facilitating some workshops on these topics myself. I definitely am in a better position to catch myself when I'm feeling it, but even then I cannot recover from it. And a lot of it is it depends on the circumstance you're in, like joining a new role, which is something that I'm doing right now. The kind of situation I'm in, I find myself. With respect to the types that you were sharing, I think perfectionist is one that I struggle with the most. And the kind of feeling it creates is really, I think you were saying burden, but also along with burden, just overwhelmed, right? Like I feel tired sometimes, because then you're trying to do so much preparation for something that you already know, just because you want to make sure you're right. You don't want to be caught doing something incorrectly. And so even if I'm an expert at a topic, I just find myself, holding myself back, just because what if I'm wrong, and therefore doing this extra preparation that might not even be needed, right? So spending more time, and then again, those feelings of anxiety, etc. Those are the thoughts that come up.
Brilliant. You mentioned one more very important thing, like with this over preparation, with this like over push almost put on yourself. It is actually quite common coping mechanism with that particular, let's say, phenomenon. But what it also means that the weight on your shoulders becomes even bigger, because now you're not only getting ready for a certain webinar or other activity that you are going to perform, although you've done it millions of times, got beautiful reviews and all the appreciation in the world, there is still this little goblin. This is how I picture the imposter syndrome, sitting on your shoulder, being absolutely ugly and resembling something between the troll and honestly, God knows what, and saying, what if you don't know everything? What if you are not fast enough in responding? And this might be draining, it might cause anxiety, it has definitely a negative effect on how you approach certain tasks. So thank you very much for sharing, guys. I see a lot of discussion happening in the chat, which is absolutely brilliant. We'll come to that in the general forum in just a second, but I promise to you guys, and I keep my word, to explain one more thing. So why it appears, from where it's coming from. We already started actually to touch upon that particular aspect. Whoops. But let us put some, let's say, order into it. So first and foremost, I already gave it away as a teaser, that there are certain childhood patterns and certain environments which will be, let's say, more pushy or more, how to put it, supportive of imposter syndrome development. First of all, situations in which you are being pressured for results. As an example, pressure to do well in school, or you are being often compared to the others, for example, to your siblings, or you are in an overprotective environment, which is highly emphasizing your certain skills or your natural intelligence, and you are sharply criticized by mistakes. What happens is that it almost dissociates at some point, and you do not need those others to tell you, you should have done that differently, you should have gotten a better grade, because this goblin already sits on your shoulder and already does that for them. So if first somebody kind of, did that for you before, later you are able to do that for yourself, so to speak. What it also means is that, it might raise certain feelings of not belonging. This is, for example, a situation in which everything went relatively easy in the primary school or in the high school, but then it gets complicated in college. And all those thoughts, what am I doing here? I'm not living up to expectations might pop up. Secondly, there might be some personality traits which also make you almost like predisposed to have that particular symptom. As you might remember, there are like five big personality traits often discussed in various kind of psychological frameworks. And those are extraversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. And in case of those five, there are two of them which are important for that particular syndrome more than the others. One is actually neuroticism. So what it effectively means is that you tend to respond strongly, or you tend to be sensitive to the external factors. Meaning, for example, that you might interpret something, ordinary happenings as something which is a threat, to which you might not react the way you should, or you don't know how to behave yourself. What it means that even minor frustrations might suddenly feel overwhelming, not to mention major ones, which definitely will unleash that particular personality trait. The other one is conscientiousness. So this is all about basically being a perfectionist in a nutshell, because you are in what you do, you desire to do your task really well, and you take your obligations really seriously. So that is, as you can imagine, based on what we already discussed, a very natural fuel to feel like I need to perform up to the highest standard. We have also emotional distress, because if you're already anxious, adding more on top, this even more weight on your shoulders, will create further pressure and will enhance that vicious circle we already mentioned. It also might raise self-doubt, diminished self-confidence. So to answer to the question that Harald posted at the beginning of our session, it's actually extremely difficult to say where self-doubt actually transforms into imposter syndrome, but I would say that those two come intertwined. And it's very difficult to, almost like a chicken and egg type of a problem. It might unleash itself in a very specific situation. One of those specific situations is when you get a new role. You feel suddenly unworthy of either career or academic opportunity that is offered for you, that you will not measure up to the expectations that others have for you, or your abilities will not match your coworkers' expectations. So that's a quite often situation, and actually in my coaching practice, and also at some extent in my corporate career before, I observed that multiple times. Even though the individuals in question are extremely capable, very well prepared, they do excellent job, nevertheless, this little goblin does its ugly, sabotage, so to say. Last but not least, we also touched upon it. Indeed, there is a confirmation in terms of studies that gender bias and institutionalist racism might actually also come into play to drive that particular phenomenon. So our first kind of big discussion point would be, what would you say, guys, are the consequences of it all? What it might lead us to if we allow that symptom to go unnoticed, or we try to ignore it all along? Chandan, go ahead.
Yeah, a really nice presentation and talk. I've just been dealing with someone in my team where they had anxiety issues, but over the time, this has become so worse that they can't sleep. And there's a lot of burnout issues. So, while we were discussing, it can really take a turn for bad. And even on the career side, they were really doing well. Like, they got just promoted, they were, being appreciated. But behind the scenes, they were like saying, I had days of not sleeping, I had, health problems, and I'm at the risk of burnout. And they were saying, like, this is not work related, but it was really hard for them to even admit that this was work related. So as leaders, people will tell you when they're having problems, but they will be also much more less likely to say that it is work. But you have to kind of you can see the effect of it when it becomes really, really severe and you feel bad, like what you could have done before. So it's one of those things where you only address it when it becomes bad. And I think that's probably, it's much severe at that point. But again, your journey starts somewhere, right? So yeah, I'd at least say that it becomes really bad in burnout, and it causes sleep problems, and that affects your health, because if you're not sleeping, it just makes things even worse, right? So at least I've seen a couple of first-hand cases. But I think people started with acknowledging it, and they have their own journey, right? They first rejected, like, I cannot be mentally depressed, or, this can't be happening to me, right? So I think that starts with denial and then acceptance and all that, those 5 stages.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those are the few things that I wanted to share.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chandan, for sharing. You mentioned several kind of items which definitely form a picture. One of them was, for example, suffering from lack of sleep or feeling pressured for a prolonged period of time. And actually somebody, Anand, in the same time typed down could cause depression. And actually there is a proven, research-proven link and correlation between imposter syndrome, especially prolonged one, and falling more prone to the depressive states. I wouldn't risk a statement that those two are, like, how to put it, automatically correlated, but they definitely fuel one another. Let me put it like that. So thank you very much for sharing. Emmanuel, you had the hand raised.
Yes, thank you for the talk. Just limiting your potential, like once you're comfortable, you want to be perceived as an expert. If you just stay in your sandbox, just be in your sandbox, and you could just not grow.
Brilliant. That's a brilliant statement. And actually, Margaret just wrote something similar, that you dodge opportunities. Because if you say to yourself, okay, I have a huge pile on my shoulders already, how much more can I bear? So how many items I need to be again perfect in or master from the first try? I will just, give it up altogether. Just don't bother with it, because if I will not nail it on the first try, probably it's not worth bothering, because everybody will see that I cannot do it, or I need to ask for help. And then again, the vicious circle starts. Yogesh, you had a hand raised.
Yeah, and I also want to see your views on like how does it we develop this during the working at the office, and because the managers unable to understand that some employees are vulnerable and pushing them hard, so we suppress the vulnerable. Because of that, we start like doing the imposter syndrome. Is there any comments on that?
In terms of like how to put it, if we see that, because I'm not sure I grasped the question correctly, but if we see that in others, we will come to that literally in a second, how to deal with this little monster. I'm showing this because I literally can envision it sitting on my shoulder. So we will talk about that just in a second, but it's really important for those when you notice that somebody is apparently showcasing certain elements which might lead to imposter syndrome. It's first of all important to almost like acknowledge it's a too big word, because we also do not want others to push them into thinking that they have it, so to speak, but almost like asking from where the anxiety comes from. So have more like coaching approach. Instead of diagnosing, ask a few questions. How does it make you feel? How ready you are to take new opportunities? What sort of barriers do you see in terms of your work? And then you might see certain highlights popping up that will help you to either confirm your hypothesis or disprove it. But more importantly, there are certain elements which we might use in order to take it under control. And we go to that literally now. Let's have a look, because Yogesh gave me a wonderful segue into it. So let me just reshare it once again. So how to get this little, I will not say any bad words because we are being recorded, but this little monster under control. First of all, actually acknowledge your feelings. The idea of either disproving them or running away from them will not do much good, because guess what? They will resurface sooner or later. So almost like admitting to yourself that it might be the case, it's a first step. And secondly, actually getting the courage together to go out with it, in a sense of getting outside, talking to others. It could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be your mentor, it could be your trusted peers. But the important thing is that when you go outside with it, first of all, there is a chance you will get a broader context. There will be others to say, Monika, listen, girl, you were a director before you were even 30. You managed to become a VP in one of the biggest organizations in Poland. I mean, lady, look at what you've managed to achieve. This is not a coincidence. If you were subpar or stupid, as you say sometimes, you will definitely not be in those shoes. So this is kind of one element. Secondly, you then tend to feel less overwhelmed, because if you share this burden with the others, then, as we say in Polish, burden, shared with others or with a friend is a burden halved. And this is very true. And last, but definitely not least, once you start talking about it, you suddenly realize there is a whole legion of us who have that symptom happening at different stages. Alone, very far from having reasons to feel isolated. You have a huge army standing hand in hand with you and ready kind of to battle it all along. Secondly, building connections might help. Why? Because you might then battle this urge to do everything by yourself. And actually you will see that asking really helps. Those of you who had a chance to go through Power course probably remember that that is one of the most powerful power strategies. Simply do the asking. But also others can offer guidance, can validate your strengths, can encourage your efforts to grow. Point number 3, actually be bold enough to challenge your doubts. And here, one of the solutions, which I absolutely adore, I kind of how to put it, almost like invented it myself, have to say. And I share that with all my power coaches and all my external coaches. It's so-called Mojo file. Let me tell you what it is. In essence, it can be in any shape or form you like. It can be an Excel, it can be a Word document, it can be a PowerPoint presentation, it can be a Post-it note or multiple notes, it can be a collage, it can be a picture, you name it. The point of it is to note down all the successes that come every day and be meticulous about it. I mean, you start with successes of like winning a 5th place in your village cake baking competition, and you go up to winning a Nobel Prize in physics and everything in between. Why it's important? Because guess what? Again, as you remember, in the main definition, we speak about highly accomplished individuals. Those people, as also research shows, tend to be highly analytical. And what it means, if on one hand, you put on your shoulders this weight related to, I haven't done this, I haven't done that, I haven't succeeded in this, I didn't grasp that, you suddenly realize that, look, I have a whole file of different events, different accomplishments, different successes that actually stares me in the face. So how those two can be put side by side and do not raise a doubt whether I'm really such a stupid person or such an accomplished person if I manage to do X, Y, Z. I really highly recommend it. I have my own as well, because it again helps to almost like challenge your doubts. Point number 4, avoid comparing yourselves to others, especially through our most favorite social media. Why? Because when we compare ourselves to others, we are never fair. Let me explain what I mean. We kind of compare ourselves to those kind of who achieved something in a given point of time, in a very specific situation. However, we forget about all the other elements that might stand behind it. We don't know the full story. We don't know what cost stands behind certain accomplishment. We don't know how those people deal with different elements. So that is definitely, not fair comparison. We need to compare apples to apples. If somebody won a Nobel Prize in physics, the question is, for example, how well he's doing as a father or as a husband. And that we don't know. Last 2, celebrate. So get into a habit of actually praising yourself for achieving something, for allowing yourself to be proud of your achievements, no matter how small they are. Because at the end of the day, we often forget actually to pat ourselves on the back and say, good job, you really did it, you made it. Because if we've done it, at least I tend to say, okay, done deal, brush it off to the next thing, right? But then let's take 5 minutes to say, yeah, good job. I really worked hard on it. I deserve that pat on the back. And last but not least, we are actually, guys, in a very privileged situation because we do actually have an absolute treasure, which is a lead, safe learning environment. We have the luxury of having others who are like-minded, who are open to growth, who are accomplished, and they are there to listen, they are there to support us, they are in the same boat, they are sharing similar experiences. So this is actually an ideal place to be, to ask for help, to share, to go out, to venture out, and to try the new things. But then, let me pause here for a second and ask you guys, stop sharing, and ask you guys about your initial reactions. What do you think about those methods to deal with our little goblin? Any comments? Yogesh, I see your hand raised, but I'm not sure whether that's a residual hand or the new hand, so to speak.
I'll lower it. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Serbi, tell us what you think.
Yeah, I think those are great. We were just discussing in chat as well about documenting successes. That's something that we all have done in some courses. So Power, we used to do a weekly journal of your accomplishments. Even if you've met 5 new people, it's an accomplishment. If you've impressed a senior stakeholder, it's an accomplishment. I think someone in the chat, Harold, mentioned about another course, New Kind of Leader, as well. So I think documenting success is great. I also wanted to build upon, Monika, the building connections point, that also something that Power emphasized on. And I think something that I also really resonate with is that imposter syndrome is rarely a personal weakness, but it could also be who in your life is contributing towards it, right? And so surrounding yourself with the kind of people who can reflect our real potential upon us, it's really important. And this is not to say that somebody needs to be standing there with a board and say, hey, Surbhi, you're the best, you know everything, you're killer or whatever, but somebody who can just be a real honest reflection in times of self-doubt, and they can remind you of all the great things that you've done. This could be your partners, your friends, your peers, your colleagues. I think that's a great one as well, and really emphasizing the need of building real connections.
That's a brilliant point, Surbhi. Plus, you know, the more validated you become because of those connections, the more kind of this little monster will not raise its ugly head. Plus, you know, a personal observation, to be perfectly honest, as you know, guys, the situation on the Polish-Ukrainian border, it's extremely complicated right now. And let me not, you know, sugarcoat it. We are all anxious because, let's face it, we have war going on our doorstep. But what I've noticed from my very personal experience, once I started to refocus myself from considering my own risks into kind of helping others and focusing on that more than, you know, my own considerations, I suddenly discovered that, first of all, my levels of anxiety come down. Secondly, I feel more in control because I am doing something which makes a difference. It might be something really small, but if we all did something small, the effect is actually huge. So refocusing our attention to others might be actually quite substantial and quite life-changing, I suppose. Margaret, you had something to add.
Yes, well, documenting is a first step, but celebrating is like really great. I think it's building this positive validation for you. So like taken from there, it's really easier to make this monster to go away. And on the less positive side, I think the comparison, at least for me personally, it's much harder to not compare myself to others because I am surrounded by brilliant people. Especially here in the Silicon Valley, everyone is very driven. And I know that circumstances are different, but how to kill that comparison monster, I have no idea.
That's a brilliant point. I mean, it has a lot to do with what we actually already mentioned. We often see just a bit of a picture, so to speak, because they might seem accomplished, and they probably are in some aspects of their life. But the big question mark is, are we comparing apples to apples, or apples to pineapples, or apples to bananas, or apples to an apple tree? Because they might be great entrepreneurs, they might be beautiful entertainers or whatnot, but at the same time, we don't know the cost.
Yes, also the circumstances are different. So I mean, that's
exactly.
Also very clear.
Exactly. Plus, you know, you almost like, how much did they have to, in brackets, pay in terms of their time, in terms of their effort, in terms of resigning from something else, which we might have, that they are in the place that they are. And that's why it's so dangerous to compare ourselves to others, especially when we see only a snippet of their life. Let me give you an example. I remember some of my friends gushing over our joint friend, weight, how beautiful she looks, how well groomed she is, because that were the, let's say, photos that she posted all around the you know, social media. What they didn't know, that the reason why she lost weight is because she went over an extremely brutal divorce, and she was not able to eat, and that was the reason why she lost weight. And this is the, how to put it, this is the danger of comparing ourselves to others, because it will never be apples to apples, because guess what? We are unique. There is only one of us, and all the prototypes have been destroyed. So in other words, that would be never a fair comparison. Rash, Your thoughts.
Oh, sorry. No, I just had a comment. This is on your Mojo. I just love that concept. I just wanted to share what I do. I'm a mother of 2 sons, both in their 20s. And I will say this, that I compulsively take pictures, right from when they were younger on various things that happened. And it's not just pictures of them, but it's also pictures of documents. I don't just file the documents somewhere, like if they want a certificate or a chess trophy or something, and things like that. So what's been happening is now that they're going through their work life and all of that, Google Memories, comes out, or Facebook Memories, or what, I have from another program I was using. Every year it'll say, on this day, this happened, and I'll send it to them. So, and one is in an investment bank, one is doing something else, and they're having a rough day. And I think it cheers them up. And then I realized after seeing that, I started doing it with my friends who are going through certain issues and things like that. I realized I have a ton of pictures. I actually identified, I did the face identification thing and all that, so I can pull it up. And I'll send it to them at times when I know they're feeling low or something. And so it makes them, they're like, oh, I climbed that mountain, I did that. So it just gives them that feeling of, I can do this, I got this. So I love your Mojo concept, and I just wanted to show how, you could extend it using some, without wasting too much time.
That's a brilliant point, Raj, because you almost like go one step forward. You become a Mojo file for others. So you're almost like combining the fact of recognizing the beauty and the, how to put that, the accomplishments of others, and adding also the aspect of others being noticed, which is one of the fundamental, let's say, needs that we tend to have and we seldom share. So by combining those two, so becoming almost like an archive of successes for others, it's brilliant because on one hand, you lift others up, but you also build connections. So it's a win-win for both parties. I saw also in the chat, Chandan getting on fire in terms of comparisons of Apple to Android. I love it, but that's exactly the point. I mean, we are comparing the Apple to the Apple picture at some time, at some points, without even realizing that. Hence, it's so dangerous, because we will never know how the truth really looks like. Guys, conscious of time, let me actually finish with one statement. The goal of the whole presentation and everything that I said, it's not actually to never feel like an imposter. The goal is to give you tools and the insight and the information so that you can talk yourself down faster from it. Because you can still have an imposter moment, but not at an imposter life. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. If you are interested in literature which stood behind my presentation, or you would like me to answer any questions which I might have noticed in all the frenzy that happened in the chat, please feel free to reach out to my email. And thank you very much for your attention today.
Monika, thank you very, very much. Everyone, I will again send the link to our feedback form. Please provide us with your feedback. Monika, thank you for an awesome session.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, guys.